Welcome to the Cannabis Growth Fund Manager Call. At this time, all participants are placed on a listen-only mode. As a reminder, this call is being recorded. I would now like to turn the call over to your host for today, Megan Vichick. Megan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Catherine. Hello, I'm Megan Vichick, a Marketing Director of the Cannabis Growth Fund, and I would like to welcome everyone who is listening in today for a call featuring Korey Bauer, Portfolio Manager of the Cannabis Growth Fund, ticker symbol CANNX. C as in cat, A as in apple, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, and X as in X-ray. For those of you who are new to the fund, the Cannabis Growth Fund is one of the first open-end mutual funds to invest primarily in companies related to the cannabis industry. The fund invests in companies across the cannabis industry located around the world. Most companies are engaged exclusively in legal activities under national and local laws, including U.S. federal and state law. The fund is offered in no-load investor and institutional share classes. Today we want to focus on what's in store for cannabis investing. Our call will last about 25 minutes and will be in a Q&A format. We want to thank those who have submitted their questions in advance, and we have included as many as possible in our call. Let's go right to the questions. Thank you for joining us today, Korey.
I appreciate the introduction, Megan.
So, first question for you. The cannabis industry is constantly evolving, so could you just take a minute or two and provide an overview of the industry as it stands in terms of size, sector, number of companies, and geography?
Yeah, the majority of the businesses are located in Canada at this time in our investable universe. There are some U.S. companies that don't touch the plant, that aren't violating federal laws. Most of those companies are CBD companies, cannabidiol, and that was legalized last year with the Hemp Bill 2018 Farm Bill. But if you look at the market cap size of the investable universe, these companies can range anywhere from $100 million up to about $7 billion in size. So as you can see, it's a pretty wide-ranging small, mid, and large cap at this time throughout the entire cannabis sector. If you look at the overall geography of where these companies are, like I said, they're in Canada, and there's about 300 of those companies. Most of those companies are listed in Canada at this time, just because of most of the companies are listing there, and they also have operations globally. It's just because Canada has taken the lead on the entire global cannabis sector at this currently. And of those 300 companies, I would say the majority of them are definitely in that small to mid range at this time. There's not many larger companies. But as we go and as we go throughout this, over the next few years here, I do expect a lot of those companies, especially some of those mid-sized companies, to grow. If you actually take a look at the sectors, just what it looks like, the makeup of it, you have many companies such as anywhere from cultivation and production, fertilizer, agricultural technology companies, extraction companies, vaping hardware, software testing, pharma and biotech. So we classify it into about 13 different sectors at this time in the cannabis sector itself.
Right, that was a good overview. So now what's been on a lot of investors' minds lately is the recent volatility in stock prices. So could you discuss what factors are driving this volatility and what we might expect over the long term?
Yeah, so since those March highs, the sector's been under significant pressure, and we think that the worst may not be over for a lot of smaller companies. So there's about 4 factors. We really classify this as about 4 factors, key factors, that have been driving the volatility. One would be CannTrust. So CannTrust was one of the largest licensed producers, or LPs in Canada that they're called. They were actually cultivating cannabis in an illegal grow room that was not licensed by Health Canada. So that was kind of the first factor that really started to really get investors a little nervous about the space. Second area is the overall retail store rollout that we've been seeing. It's actually been very slow across the entire country of Canada, except in one area, just Alberta is the only province that actually did a very good job with store rollouts. So just to give everyone a sense of how many stores are needed, if we actually compare it to, let's say, a Colorado here in the United States, which is a very mature cannabis market, Ontario being the most populated region in Canada, has about 75 stores. So if we take that same density, one store per 10,000 people, Ontario will need to have roughly 1,400 stores. So as you can see, it's completely underdeveloped. There needs to be more retail outlets for these consumers to be able to access the cannabis in a close range from their houses. Another factor that we think that is causing a lot of the volatility recently is obviously the vaping news. So the CDC has reported at least 26 people have died from vaping or related lung diseases since the news came to light back in July, and nearly 1,300 people have fallen ill so far. But from what we've been reading, a lot from this outbreak was there was an additive vitamin E acetate in oils containing THC. So we think that there's this additive that's being placed in these vape pens, and a lot of this is in the illicit market, not so much on the legal market. And most of the people are buying from the illicit market, and that's been really the main issue based on what we've seen so far. So we think this is going to pass, and obviously more regulation is actually a good thing for this sector, and we think that more regulation for vaping is actually, again, a good thing. So hopefully we'll get some guidance soon from the FDA. And lastly, the biggest factor that caused the global cannabis stocks that we think that has been why it's so slow is definitely that illicit market. There was a study done by the RAND Corporation. They estimated nearly $52 billion was spent on illegal cannabis back in 2016. So many of the legal cannabis companies are still fighting that price issue. So if you look at of legal cannabis prices versus illicit cannabis prices, and if you actually take a look at it, legal cannabis prices are actually about double the price of the illicit market. So we really need to see that gap close a little bit here. So that would definitely solve a lot of the problems for these licensed producers.
So given the volatility that we've been seeing, let's talk about a few sub-industries that you prefer and maybe a few that you're avoiding.
Yeah, I mean, one area we really like, Megan, is in the extraction space. So we think this is one bright spot for the sector overall. So many of these companies are either profitable or they will be profitable over the next few quarters, which is really key in the cannabis sector at this time. These companies really are focused on areas that doesn't actually grow the plant at all. So and I'll get into that on my next comment, but they don't really grow the plant, and they're actually not at risk for that price compression when it comes to the actual just growers, the actual pure cultivators. So we think that that area. So these companies, extraction companies, what they do is they actually take the plant and they extract the oils and the actual terpenes and the actual CBD or THC out of the plant and make it into an oil format, and then that's how these derivative products are made, such as vape pens or beverages, et cetera. And then the one area that we think is that the most at risk by far are the pure growers, just the companies that are focusing purely on the growing of cannabis, especially lower quality cannabis. We're already seeing oversupply across most of Canada at this time, and we think that companies really should be focusing on a higher quality indoor grow, and we just think there's so much excess supply that most of these companies are not going to be able to sell this cannabis to the market. And especially, I've actually had a conversation with one company recently, and they said the consumer really is disappointed by the actual flower that's being produced by many of the Canadian LPs. So I think it's time for these companies to focus on growing a quality product instead of worrying about quantity, and that's kind of been the key. Is they've really been focusing on that quantity number, but the problem is they can't sell it because it's not great quality cannabis.
That makes sense. So let's switch topics a little bit and talk about legalization. So first, in the U.S., what progress has been made with regard to legalization or pro-cannabis legislation?
Yeah, so if we look recently, the SAFE Act. So there's a bill that was the SAFE Act, which I don't know if many of you have actually maybe seen in the news. So this was back in September 25th. Actually, the House of Representatives passed the Safe Banking Act. So it was actually the first time a body in U.S. Congress in the history ever approved a pro-cannabis legislation. So the act was actually sponsored by Colorado Representative Ed Pulmiter and introduced originally in March. So it was a very overwhelming support in the actual the House. So now this is going to be passed. Next step is going to be to go to the Senate and then hopefully for presidential approval. But we don't think this is probably not going to happen until 2020, next year sometime. So what does this actually permit? This actually permits banks to service cannabis companies, bank accounts, credit cards that are compliant with the state legislation. Only commercial banking services. If the bill is passed, it will enable consumers to use credit cards and debit cards to purchase cannabis. So we think that that's a really big deal, and we're really hoping that this gets pushed through, like I said, next year sometime. What it does not permit is access to investment banking services and capital markets. I know a lot of people were hoping that this would be that would be included, and it still may, which we hope it will be, because that obviously is a game changer, as many of these U.S. multi-state operators are going to need access to capital, and it's very difficult to get access to capital because cannabis is still a Schedule I illegal substance at the U.S. federal level, and banks are not allowed to provide any funding to these companies. So another something else that's being looked at as well is the States Act. So what the States Act is, it was actually proposed this year by Cory Gardner and also Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. The bill would recognize the legalization of cannabis and U.S. state laws that have legalized it. So if the states legalized it and the companies operating in that state, the federal government would not prosecute any company or go after any company that's operating legally in that state. So this is also very important, and we're hoping that this also gets some momentum going into next year. And then lastly, there was it's called the MORE Act. It's also bipartisan legislation introduced in July of this year by Kamala Harris and Gerald Nadler from New York. It's actually one of the most comprehensive marijuana reform bills ever introduced, and it seeks to decriminalize marijuana at a federal level by removing the substance from the Controlled Substances Act, and actually expunges prior federal courts convictions, among other provisions. So as you can see, there's definitely some very interesting things being worked on at this time, but none of this actually has been passed, and I'm hoping that the government can come together on this and we can get this through next year sometime.
Right. So we've got the SAFE Act, the States Act, the MORE Act in the U.S. Moving to Canada, could you describe what's going on with the Cannabis 2.0 and how this will affect the industry?
So perfect timing for the call, everybody. Canada is expected to legalize the sale of cannabis derivatives tomorrow, October 17th. So this is perfect timing for the call. So this is a great time to focus on this. So we actually believe that the introduction of these cannabis derivatives into the market will lead to meaningful revenue growth and an improvement in profitability for the entire cannabis sector over the medium to long term. So what this means is, if you take a look at how this is going to play out, we had cannabis legalization 1.0, right? So the first rollout was just flower and oils. Now we're going to be moving towards more topicals, creams, edibles, and beverages. So these are higher margin products for these licensed producers, and we think this is going to be actually add a very, very big boost to a lot of companies' earnings over the next year or so. But first things first is it will take at least 2 more months for these new cannabis products to actually become available, though, for purchase, though, as federal license holders are required to provide Health Canada a 60-day notice of intent to sell these new products. So there is going to be a little bit of lag here. So really, tomorrow is really the first day, but really it's 2 months from now these products are going to actually hit the shelf. So we're going to have some lead up to it. If you take a look at the concerns over vaping with these 2.0 products, we really think that we think that Canada will allow vapes to come into the market, even despite all the recent news that we've seen. We don't think that the Canadian government would want folks to go to the illicit market for these vapes. So we really think that this is an exciting, like I said, exciting rollout here of the 2.0 products, and we're really interested to see how some of these companies are talking about beverages. And here in the U.S., beverages are not a very big segment, so we're interested to see if these companies can actually deliver a viable product to the consumer.
So the countdown starts tomorrow, the 60-day countdown. So let's go across the world, and could you talk about a few countries that seem to be gaining traction in terms of legalization?
Yeah. So if we take a look at what's going on globally, we really want to hone in on kind of 3 areas that we think are very interesting at this time. So we really think Europe is going to be the next major market in the years to come. But we think that the estimates are a little overblown by a lot of the analysts in the near term. We agree with Jefferies that Germany's sales should be around about half $500 million. But if you take that relative to what Canada's going to be, Canada's about at around $3 billion. So as you can see, it's still a small portion of a lot of these Canadian LPs' earnings going forward. At this point, the global cannabis market is predominantly in the U.S. and Canada. But another area that we really like is Mexico. So that's something else that's coming online here very shortly. I know that it should be finalized by the end of, I'm hoping, this month. That's what we've been hearing from the Parliamentary Commission of Justice down in Mexico. We think that there's something going to happen there, hopefully for having a recreational legalization over the next few weeks here. And then the other one I really want to focus on is Australia. So that's been kind of under the radar for a lot of analysts, and we're really focusing on this area. So if we take a look at Australia, they've actually began its transition toward medical legalization in 2015 when the Australian Parliament legalized cannabis cultivation for medical and research purposes. So if we take a look at the size of that market, we think that will reach anywhere from about $500 million by the end of 2028. We do think this is a pretty, interesting opportunity, especially for the medical side in Australia. And we think by 2028 there could be well over 500,000 medical patients in Australia. So we think this is a really, really, really interesting market looking forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So that's been another focus of our investment thesis, is to find companies that are positioning themselves in that country.
Great. I think that provides a good macro overview of the cannabis industry, so thank you. I want to turn our focus for the last few questions about the Cannabis Growth Fund. Could you just discuss for a few minutes what kind of companies you seek for the fund? And I know you talked about some subsectors, so you want to talk about a few that are attractive for the fund?
Sure. Companies we seek, first thing we do is we screen for companies that are legal companies. As Megan mentioned at the beginning, the companies need to be operating legally on that, also at federal and at the state levels. So the majority of the companies that we buy will be located in Canada. We do own some companies here in the U.S., as I mentioned. They are pure CBD companies, but we don't own any companies that physically touch the plant here in the U.S. that has 0.03% THC or above, because that is still considered illegal by the federal laws at this point. So looking at how we find quality companies is we really want to look for high quality management teams with prior CPG or pharmaceutical background that we think are going to be able to navigate through this very, very, very tough regulatory environment, and also a very challenging consumer environment as well, just based on how many different products and brands and different formats this can be placed in. Just how many areas of disruption that the cannabis sector we think can actually disrupt over the next 5 to 10 years. We also focus on, talk about the company's sustainability. We really want to look at the best brand, the best products, the best partnerships, and we really want to focus on our time on companies that are trending towards that positive EBITDA and trying to have positive cash flows. We really think that that's key That's because a lot of these companies are blowing through a lot of cash, and we really want to focus on those companies that are really hunkering down and doing a really good job during this difficult time that we're experiencing in the space. We also put a big weight on momentum and how that drives our investment decisions. We want to overweight the strongest companies, and we want to underweight the weaker names. This allows us also to avoid value traps and to avoid the weaker names inside the sector. Just giving you a quick overview of that. And then also, just kind of real quick, we also believe in active management, which our fund is. It's an active fund, and we think active management is critical in an emerging sector with high volatility and rapidly evolving backdrop. And we think active management can take advantage of these emerging companies that we think could be disruptive to the overall industry. So.
Now, I heard you mention brand recognition. Why is that important in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, brand recognition, Megan, is so important. Back in 2014, just to give everybody an idea, there was about 166 cannabis brands when 2 states have legalized cannabis. This is on the state side. This is the United States. Currently in the U.S., there is 2,650 brands. So that is, it's mind-boggling how quickly we have evolved to all these different brands, and what is the consumer going to pick? So the key thing for us is a company that has trust with the public, right? When that consumer walks into the store, they want that repeatable experience every single time with that product. That's really something that's so crucial to this sector, in any sector, right? In any, if you walk down the aisle, you expect, we think it's very similar to walking down the soda aisle, right? You got your Coke, you got your Pepsi, and you got every other brand. So we really want to focus on those companies that are going to be the Coke and Pepsis, and those are the companies that we really want to spend time on trying to find those high quality companies that are safe, that's tested by the company, because a lot of these products that are on the shelves today, they claim that they have X amount of milligrams of CBD in it, and when it's tested, they found no CBD in it. So I think that's really crucial. Just having the consumer, really trust your brand and understand that you have a great product and that they know what they're getting every single time.
Well, Coke and Pepsi, that's a good analogy. So given the recent volatility in stock prices recently, how might an investor add the Cannabis Growth Fund to their portfolio?
Yeah, in any emerging industry, there will be volatility. It's high volatility in an emerging industry is true to any emerging industry, no matter if you look across the entire globe, which company is more risk. There's no doubt. But we do think that this is a growth opportunity. This has been in prohibition now for over 80 years, and we think that there's so much to know and so much to learn. And I think that even the medical community seems to be embracing a lot of the a lot of the different research studies that are being done, and we actually have the first FDA-approved drug, Epidiolex, from GW Pharmaceuticals. So this is real medicine. This is treating people's real ailments, and I think that it's definitely a part of a growth area in a portfolio, and I think that this is it's an exciting time to watch this industry evolve, especially over the next 3 to 5 years, and we think it's that there's going to be periods of we actually call this period a shakeout period, where you're going to shake out the bad actors and the good actors are going to emerge. It's just like the tech bubble back in 2001 and 2. You had great companies that came out of that. So it's very similar time right now, and I think that as we get through this, I think that we could be. I'm hoping we're troughing here, going into a positive tailwind going into next year. I really think that this is a good time to be looking at the sector and maybe thinking about that. How does this fit into a client's portfolio? And I think it really fits into that growth area, like I've been saying.
Right. And finally, one last question: what is your outlook for the cannabis sector?
So if you take a look, whether it's next year or even a few years out, I mean, there are some estimates, Megan, projecting anywhere from a few $100 billion a year in revenues globally, and we really think that this is an opportunity to like I said, being involved in a sector from its infancy, because this is still emerging. There's no doubt it's still early. It's still it's going through its growth. It's going through its phases, And we really think that there is going to be some real, true, great companies and great brands that come out of this, and that are going to be able to capture that global cannabis play. And but I will say again, I think that this is a very, very interesting sector. It's different than a lot of other sectors, although it's similar. It's different just because of how many ways people like to compare this to the wine market. While that's true, right? You have your low, your mid, your high-end wines. That's true. But the difference is wine is only one form factor. Cannabis is in many different form factors, whether it's pills, whether it's topicals, whether it's creams. I mean, you name it. I mean, it's beverages, gummies. It's just there's so many different use cases. The medical side of things, we don't know how deep that's going to go. We're really excited to see new medical treatments come out from this. But again, everything needs to be tested and needs to go through the rigorous stages of the clinical trials to see how this will affect and how this will grow over the next 5-10 years. But it's definitely an exciting time, and it's really interesting how the space has evolved even over the last few months since we launched the product. But yeah, I mean, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time today to come out and listen to the call. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. But again, this is an exciting time, and hopefully we can welcome you as an investor down the road.
Right, and thank you, Korey, for sharing your thoughts with us today. I also want to thank our listeners for joining us. We look forward to working with you and hope that you will consider the Cannabis Growth Fund, ticker symbols CANNX or CANIX, as a part of your portfolio. For more information, visit our website at cannabisgrowthfunds.com. Thanks, and have a good evening.